The signal came in on every frequency we had, and none of our systems could identify the source. I was in the middle of reviewing the week's patrol schedules when every screen on the bridge of the UES Relentless lit up at once. Lieutenant Owen Crane nearly knocked his coffee off the console reaching for his headset. The sound that filled the bridge was unlike anything I had ever heard in 12 years of service. It was not a distress signal. It was not static. It was structured, deliberate, and it was clearly designed to be understood. 47 distinct tonal patterns repeating in a sequence that my systems immediately flagged as mathematical. Prime numbers. They were announcing themselves with prime numbers. I stood up from my chair. My name is Yara Voss. I am a commander in the United Earth Federation Navy, and for the last 3 years, I have commanded the Relentless, a heavy strike carrier assigned to outer solar patrol. We watch the edge of the system. We monitor for debris, for rogue bodies, for anything the automated systems might flag as unusual. In 12 years and 3 years of command, nothing unusual had ever come. I had begun to suspect nothing unusual ever would. I was wrong about that. Source? I said to Crane. He was already working. His fingers moved fast across the board, and his face was doing something I had never seen it do before. He looked genuinely uncertain. Owen Crane was not a man who showed uncertainty easily. He had been doing sensor analysis for 9 years, and he could read a readout the way other people read a newspaper. The fact that he looked uncertain made my stomach tighten. 3 million kilometers off Luna, he said. It just appeared. Commander, there was nothing there 30 seconds ago. I have the log. There was nothing. And then there was a ship. How big? He paused. His fingers moved again. Very big, he said. That was not a number. I crossed to his station and looked at the screen myself. The object was registering at nearly 2 kilometers in length. It was white on the thermal scan, almost perfectly white, which meant it was radiating heat evenly across its entire surface. No hotspots, no engine burn, no thrust trail. Whatever it used to travel, it was not anything our engineers had ever imagined. And the shape of it, the long cathedral-like structure with rings of light spaced evenly along its hull, was nothing like anything in any database I had ever been trained on. "Get me Fleet Command," I said. "Already on," said Ensign Petra Wade from the communications station. She was 24 years old and she was doing an admirable job of keeping her voice level. "Admiral Hargrove is asking for a status report. Tell him I need 30 seconds. In those 30 seconds, I did 3 things. First, I raised full battle readiness on the Relentless. Every crew member went to station. Every system came online. The launch bays opened. Second, I sent a coded tight beam to the 6 other ships in our patrol group, and within 20 seconds, I had confirmation that they had all received it and were already moving into formation. Third, I looked at the ship again. It was not moving. It had appeared at 3 million kilometers off Luna, and it had stayed exactly there. It was broadcasting its mathematical signal steadily, without variation, without escalation. It was not approaching. It was not powering weapons. It was not doing anything that my training told me constituted a hostile act. It was sitting there, the way you might sit quietly in a room when you do not want to frighten the animal inside. That thought did not comfort me. Admiral Hargrove came on the line from Fleet Command on Luna. He was a broad man with a wide face that had spent decades being professionally calm under pressure. And he was calm now, which told me he had already seen the data and made his peace with it. "Commander Voss," he said, "I have the same picture you have. What's your read?" "Unknown origin. Unknown propulsion. They dropped out of whatever they used to travel without any signature we could detect. The signal is structured mathematics, probably designed as a universal opener. They have not approached and they have not done anything aggressive." "That's also my read," he said. "Earth is aware. The Council is convening. In the meantime, you're the closest military asset, which means you're the welcoming committee." "Understood," I said. "Don't start anything." "I never do," I said. He almost smiled. "No, but don't finish anything either. Not yet." The next 4 hours were unlike anything in my career. The alien vessel sat where it had appeared and continued broadcasting. Our best linguists and mathematicians on Luna worked the signal in real time. By hour 2, they had confirmed that the mathematical sequence was a kind of greeting, a structured opening, designed to establish that the sender was intelligent and capable of symbolic reasoning. By hour 3, the signal had changed, the mathematics faded, and something new began. It was language. Or rather, it was an attempt at language. It was English. Not perfect English, not immediately intelligible English, but recognizably, unmistakably English. They had been listening to our transmissions. They had found us by listening to our signals, our radio broadcasts, our satellite data, and they had spent enough time studying what they heard to build a working, if imperfect, model of our language. The fact that they could do this at all, in what I could only assume was a limited window of observation time, told me more about them than any weapon could have. They were very good at learning. The first full sentence that came through clearly was, "We come with open hands. We wish to meet." Owen Crane read it off his screen, and then looked at me. "With open hands," he repeated. "I heard it," I said. "What do we do?" I looked at the ship on the screen. I looked at the formation of our 7 vessels, spread in a tight defensive arc between the alien and Luna. I thought about Admiral Hargrove's instruction not to start or finish anything. I thought about 12 years of service, and 3 years of command, and the fact that nothing in any of my training had covered this exact situation. Then I picked up the comm and responded. "This is Commander Yara Voss of the United Earth Federation Navy," I said. "We have received your signal. Transmit your vessel's intentions and the number of personnel you wish to bring to any meeting point." There was a pause of about 90 seconds. Then the response came. "We are the Authority. We represent the Galactic Conclave. We wish to bring 4 members of our delegation to meet with your leaders. We ask for a meeting place of your choosing." I told them to wait. Then I got Admiral Hargrove back on the line. "They want a dock," I said. 4 of them. They're calling themselves the Authority, and they claim to represent something called the Galactic Conclave. "A galactic government," Hargrove said. That's how it sounds." There was a pause on his end. I could hear him talking to someone else. Then he came back. "The Council has authorized a meeting. Not on Luna. Not on Earth. Aboard the Relentless. You will host them, Commander." "Understood." "And Voss?" "Sir? Don't let them see you nervous." "I'm not nervous," I said. That was not entirely true, but nervousness and I had a long professional arrangement. I acknowledged it, I filed it away, and I got to work. I spent the next hour preparing the Relentless's docking bay and the adjoining conference room. I selected 6 crew members to be present. Crane, Wade, my senior engineer, Lieutenant Dara Hollis, my medical officer, Dr. Neil Foss, and 2 others I trusted completely. I put every other crew member on station and told them to stay calm, stay professional, and absolutely not crowd any corridor the guests might use. I changed into my formal service uniform. I checked my sidearm. I thought about whether to carry it visibly, and decided that I would, not as a threat, as an honest statement of what I was. The Authority shuttle that detached from their vessel was elegant. There is no other word for it. It moved like water, without any visible thrust, curving through space with an ease that made our own shuttle bays look like something a child built out of boxes. It entered our docking bay with no sound, no exhaust, no vibration. It simply arrived. The bay doors closed, atmosphere pressurized, and then the door of the Authority shuttle opened. The being who stepped out first was tall. He stood nearly 2.5 meters and his frame was slender, in a way that suggested his homeworld had less gravity than ours. His skin was silver gray and smooth. His face had 2 eyes, larger than human eyes and set wider, with irises that were a deep, steady amber. He had no visible nose, only 2 narrow slits above what was clearly a mouth. He had 4 fingers on each hand, long and triple-jointed, and as he stepped onto the deck of my docking bay, he spread his arms wide, both pairs of hands open, palms forward. He was smiling, or at least doing something with his mouth that looked very much like a smile. The small device clipped near his throat pulsed with a faint light, and then he spoke, and the words came out in clear, careful English. "Commander Voss," he said, "I am Ambassador Tavail Sen of the Authority. We are grateful for your welcome." I looked at him for a moment. I looked at the 3 beings behind him, all of different builds and colors, all standing quietly. all watching me with enormous eyes. I looked at the open hands, the soft posture, the expression that was clearly meant to communicate peace. Then I stepped forward and extended my own hand. He looked at it. He had clearly learned about handshakes from our transmissions, because after a very brief pause he reached out with one of his long-fingered hands and wrapped it around mine. His grip was gentle, tentative. His fingers were cool to the touch. "Ambassador," I said, "welcome to the Relentless." I led them through the ship. I had arranged the route deliberately to pass through the main corridor near the equipment bays, where some of our heavier machinery was visible through the transparent panels. I watched Taval's eyes move to the machinery. I watched his gaze track over the structural reinforcements, the sealed weapons lockers, the rows of maintenance equipment. He had the look of someone who was building a picture in his mind, and was not entirely sure he liked what the picture was becoming. In the conference room, I let him speak first. He told me about the Galactic Conclave. He told it the way someone recites something they are proud of, with the measured warmth of a person describing something they consider genuinely good. The Conclave, he explained, was an alliance of 42 civilizations, spanning a significant portion of the galaxy. It had been established 11,000 years ago, after the last of the great galactic conflicts had left several species near extinction. The founding principle was simple: peace through shared governance. Every member species surrendered certain rights to conflict with any other member species, agreed to common standards of conduct, and in return received access to the Conclave's accumulated knowledge, resources, and protection. Protection from what? I asked. He paused at that. Just briefly. There are things in the galaxy, he said, that do not belong to the Conclave. We monitor them. We maintain boundaries. But that is a longer conversation. I look forward to having it, I said. He smiled again. The Conclave has been aware of your system for some years. We have been monitoring your transmissions at long range. We were very pleased to see your civilization developing so rapidly. You are, if I may say, a remarkable species. Your progress has been quite fast. Thank you, I said. You have had difficulties, he said. We observed some of your broadcasts, conflicts between your nations, environmental troubles. We hoped you would resolve them, and indeed you seem to have made significant progress. The Conclave was prepared to wait as long as necessary for you to reach a point of stability before making contact. What made you decide now was the right time? I asked. He tilted his head slightly. Your civilization has not had a major conflict between your primary political groups in 32 of your years. That was our benchmark. We have a standard by which we assess readiness for contact, and you reached it. I looked at him for a moment. 32 years without a major conflict. To the Conclave, apparently, that was the sign of a civilization that had grown up, that had put the difficult phase behind it. I thought about what those 32 years had actually looked like from the inside. I thought about the things that had happened in that time that had not risen to the level of a major conflict between primary political groups, but had nevertheless been very serious indeed. I thought about the military budget, the research programs, the things we had built and developed and refined during those 32 years of relative quiet. I said nothing about any of that. The Conclave comes to welcome a new child to the galactic family, Taval said. His voice was warm, genuinely warm. He meant it. You will have access to our accumulated knowledge, our member species, our trade networks, and our shared resources. You are not alone any longer, Commander Voss. The galaxy has found you. He was looking at me with an expression of real generosity, of kindness. He believed every word he was saying, and he meant it as a gift. I looked back at him for a moment. Ambassador, I said, I appreciate the welcome. I do. But I want to be clear about something. We are not a child. The United Earth Federation is a sovereign government of 9 billion people. We are glad to speak with the Conclave, glad to consider any arrangement that benefits both parties, but we will be entering any such arrangement as equals. He blinked his large amber eyes. The three beings behind him were very still. Of course, he said, after a pause. Of course. That is the Conclave's intention entirely. He was accommodating, gracious. He did not argue. But I watched his face during that pause, the fraction of a second before his response, and I saw something that told me the word equals had not been the word he expected to hear. He had come here prepared to welcome. He had come prepared to be generous. to extend his hand and invite a young civilization into something larger than itself. He had not come prepared for the possibility that the young civilization might look at his hand and say, calmly and without anger, that it would be shaking hands with him, not holding his. That was the moment I understood that the conversation we were really having had not yet begun. After the meeting, I stood in the docking bay and watched the Authority shuttle pull away from the Relentless. Owen Crane came to stand beside me. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the elegant silver craft as it curved away through space. "So," he said, "how do you think that went?" "They're kind," I said. "They're genuinely kind. Tavale means everything he says." "But," said Crane. "But they think we're something we're not," I said. "What do they think we are?" I watched the shuttle until it was small against the stars. "They think we're the end of something," I said. "The end of our difficult years. The end of our childhood." The way he put it. "And what are we actually?" I turned away from the viewport. "We're what we've always been," I said. "Let's get back to work." That night I sat in my quarters and wrote my first official contact report. I described Tavale. I described the conclave. I described the meeting in careful, accurate terms. At the end, I added a single line that I marked for Admiral Hargrove's eyes specifically. It read, "They do not know what they have found. I recommend we not rush to correct them." Hargrove's response came back within the hour. It was 2 words. "Agreed. Continue." I set the report aside and looked out the viewport at the Authority vessel, still sitting at its position off Luna, still broadcasting its mathematical greeting into the dark. 42 civilizations, 11,000 years of accumulated peace. A galaxy full of species that had set down their weapons and built something together. I thought about what it had taken humans to get from caves to space. Every step of it. Every war and every treaty. Every discovery made in the aftermath of conflict. Every technology that started as a weapon and ended as a tool. Every generation that had fought and every generation that had built. The whole long, complicated, bloody, brilliant story of a species that had refused at every step to stop. We were not the end of our difficult years. We were the product of them. Every difficult year had made us more precisely what we were. And what we were, I was beginning to understand, was something the galaxy had not encountered before. The Conclave had found a young civilization. They were right about that. They just had no idea what kind of young it was. Outside the viewport, the alien ship glowed softly in the dark, patient and generous, and completely unaware of what it had walked into the room with. I closed my report and went to sleep, because tomorrow was going to be a long day, and I had learned a long time ago that you do not waste rest when you can get it. The galaxy could wait until morning. The data cube was standard issue, the kind we handed to anyone who asked for it. Protocol required us to share our civilization's cultural and historical archive with any verified first contact delegation. It was one of those rules written by people who imagined first contact would feel like a library handoff, calm and orderly, 2 parties sitting across a table, exchanging information with the same kind of polite formality you might use when lending someone a book. I had the cube prepared by morning, loaded with 4,000 years of recorded human history, our art, our science, our literature, our political structures, and everything in between. Tavale accepted it with both hands and a small formal bow. "We will review this with great care," he said. "Knowledge shared between civilizations is one of the Conclave's highest values." "Take all the time you need," I said. That was at 7 in the morning. By 9, the Authority delegation had returned to their vessel with the cube and connected it to what Tavale had described as their cognition core. At 9:43, my communications board indicated that all outgoing transmissions from the Authority vessel had stopped. Not reduced. Stopped. By noon, nobody on the ship had heard from Tavale in 3 hours. Owen Crane flagged it at his station. "They've gone quiet," he said. "No signal traffic. No response to our check-in ping." "Try again," I said. He did. Nothing. I was not worried yet. I was watching. There is a difference. At 2 in the afternoon, 6 hours after they had received the cube, Tavale's voice came through on the comm channel. He did not say hello. He did not open with any of the formal phrases he had used in every previous communication. He simply spoke, and his voice had something in it that had not been there before. "Commander Voss," he said, Are you available to speak? I'm here, I said. A pause. We have been reviewing the archive. I know. How are you finding it? Another pause. Longer this time. We have some questions, he said. Of course. What would you like to know? There was a silence that went on long enough that I began to wonder if the connection had dropped. Is it complete? Tavale asked at last. The archive. Is it a complete record? As complete as we could make it, I said. It covers the major documented events of the last 4,000 years. There are gaps in the earlier records, naturally, but from around 2,000 years ago onward, coverage is fairly comprehensive. Another silence. Commander, Tavale said carefully, the record indicates a very large number of what appear to be armed conflicts between your civilizations. Between our nations, I said. Yes, that's correct. Over the full span of the archive. That's correct. The silence this time was different in quality. It was not the silence of someone thinking through a language barrier or searching for the right words. It was the silence of someone standing in front of something that was much larger than they expected, and not being entirely sure where to stand in relation to it. How many? Tavale asked. I thought about it. Documented armed conflicts between organized political groups over the full 4,000 years, somewhere around 14,000, depending on how you define the threshold. The historians debate the exact number, because the criteria for what constitutes a formal conflict versus a smaller incident varies by era and region. The silence after that lasted almost 90 seconds. I waited. I had plenty of practice waiting. And you still exist, Tavale said finally. It was not quite a question. We still exist, I agreed. Your population, he said slowly. It has grown. Over this period, despite these conflicts. Significantly, I said. We went from approximately 1 billion people 2,000 years ago to 9 billion today. I heard something on the other end of the line that I could not precisely identify. It might have been a sharp intake of breath. It might have been a word in a thori that his translator was not rendering. Whatever it was short and involuntary. I see, Tavale said. Is there anything specific in the archive you'd like me to walk you through? I offered. We will contact you again soon, he said. Thank you, Commander. The channel closed. Crane looked at me from his station. His expression was carefully neutral, which meant he was working hard to keep it that way. 14,000, he said. Roughly, I said. And we're the ones with the record of it. We're the ones who survived to write it down, I said. That's an important distinction. The next contact came at 6 in the evening. Not from Tavale this time, but from a different voice, higher and more clipped, with a translation that was slightly less polished than Tavale's. It identified itself as the Conclave's lead xenobiologist aboard the Athori vessel, a researcher named Vel something, the second part of her name coming out garbled by the translator. She had a list of questions. I answered them as honestly as I could. She wanted to know about human pain tolerance. She had found medical records in the archive, and certain details had drawn her attention. I explained that human pain tolerance varied significantly between individuals, and that humans had developed extensive medical approaches to managing it, but that as a general matter, yes, the human threshold was fairly high compared to our closest genetic relatives. She asked about endurance. I explained persistence hunting. I described how human ancestors had run prey animals to exhaustion over distances that would be impossible for almost any other predator on our planet. The prey was faster, the human was not. But the human did not stop. The human kept going, kilometer after kilometer, hour after hour, sometimes over an entire day, until the prey simply could no longer continue. She was quiet while I described this. She asked about our relationship with other predatory animals. I told her about dogs. There was a very long pause. You domesticated a predator species, she said. One of our most successful ones, yes, I said. We've had an ongoing relationship with domestic dogs for at least 15,000 years. They're among our most common companion animals. Companion? She repeated. We keep them in our homes, I said. They live with our families. Our children grow up with them. Another silence. Commander Voss, she said carefully. On the world where my species evolved, there were no predatory animals that posed a serious threat to adult members of our kind. The most dangerous animals were herbivores of significant size. We avoided them. Can I ask, on your world, what were the most dangerous animals relative to your species? It depends on the era, I said. In earlier periods of our evolutionary history, large predators were a significant survival pressure. As we developed tools and moved in organized groups, the dynamic changed. For most of recorded history, other humans have posed the most consistent danger to any given human. The silence after that one lasted almost 2 minutes. I have one more question, she said, and I noticed that her voice had changed in a way I could not quite measure. Flattened out, maybe. Become more careful. Go ahead, I said. Your archive includes recordings of your entertainment, she said. Your art, your literature, your visual media. A significant proportion of it depicts conflict, organized conflict, individual conflict, conflict between groups and between species in works of fiction. Your most popular entertainment genres, across multiple eras, appear to center on this subject. That's accurate, I said. Your children, she said. They engage with this content. From fairly young ages, yes. Some of it is specifically designed for children. We have a long tradition of stories involving heroes and obstacles and conflict. It's considered a normal part of cultural development. Another silence. Then, thank you, Commander. We will be in contact. She disconnected. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling of the bridge for a moment. Neil Foss, my medical officer, had been sitting quietly in the corner of the bridge for the last hour, listening. He was a thoughtful man who said less than most people and noticed more than almost anyone. They're scared, he said. Not exactly, I said. They're processing. Scared is part of processing, he said. Fair enough. The 14,000 figure is what got them first, he said. But I think the dogs got them more. Why the dogs? Crane asked. Foss thought about it. Because the wars are terrible, but comprehensible. You can imagine a species going to war, even a lot of wars. But keeping a predator as a pet, raising it with your children, loving it, that suggests something about what we are that goes beyond the wars. The wars are what we did. The dogs are what we are. I looked at him. He was right, and I had not thought of it in quite those terms. The final contact of the day came from Tavale himself, at nearly midnight. He asked if I would come aboard the Relentless's conference room for a face-to-face meeting. I said yes. He arrived in 20 minutes, alone this time, and he looked different than he had in our first meeting. The warmth was still there. Tavale was a genuinely warm being, and I had come to understand that warmth was real, not diplomatic. But there was something underneath it now, something quieter and more careful, like a person who has been reading a difficult book and has not yet decided what they think about it. He sat down across from me at the conference table. For a moment he looked at his own hands, both pairs of long-fingered hands resting on the table in front of him. I want to be honest with you, he said, because I think honesty is the best foundation. I agree, I said. The archive has been difficult for my team, he said. Not because we judge you. I want to be clear that the conclave does not judge member candidates by their past. We judge them by their present trajectory. And your trajectory, as I said yesterday, is one of significant progress toward stability. Thank you, I said. But my team is unsettled, he said, and I am trying to understand why, precisely. What's your theory? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, every species that has joined the conclave came to us from a position of relief. They had experienced conflict, sometimes terrible conflict, and they had reached a point where they were ready to put it behind them. They were grateful for peace. They had learned to want it the way you want air after you have been without it. He looked at me steadily with his amber eyes. Your archive does not read that way, he said. Your recent decades are peaceful by your historical standards, which is genuinely impressive. But when I study how your civilization talks about this peace, how your media and your culture and your political discourse treats it, I do not find relief. I find preparation. I said nothing. Your military budget, he said, it has not decreased during your peaceful period. It has increased. Your weapons development programs have continued at a pace I would associate with a civilization preparing for conflict, not one that has moved past it. Your cultural output, your entertainment, your education system, they all maintain and even celebrate the knowledge and practice of conflict, even as your actual conflicts have reduced. He paused. I am not saying this as an accusation, he said. I am saying it because I am trying to understand what you are. I looked at him for a long time. I thought about what Admiral Hargrove had said. I thought about what I had told myself, in my quarters, the night before, and I decided that Tavail, who had come to me with honesty, deserved something honest in return. Not everything, but something. We are exactly what the archive says we are, I said. 14,000 wars did not beat the fight out of us. They refined us. Every conflict we survived, every technology we developed, every strategy we learned, made us more precisely what we needed to be, to survive the next one. We are peaceful right now because we choose to be, because we have built institutions and agreements that manage our conflicts without fighting. But we have not stopped being what made those conflicts survivable in the first place. Tavail looked at me very steadily. And what is that? He asked. Ready, I said. The words sat between us on the table. He did not respond immediately. He looked at his hands again, the long fingers interlaced now. When he looked up, his expression was something I had not seen on his face before. It was not fear. It was not unfriendliness. It was something closer to the expression of a person who has just realized that the road ahead is longer and more interesting than the map suggested. The Conclave, he said slowly, has never accepted a member that would describe itself that way. I know, I said. It presents certain questions, he said. I imagine it does, I said. I'm happy to answer them. He nodded slowly. I will need to transmit a more complete report to the Conclave Council, he said. This meeting has given me considerably more to report than I anticipated. That's understandable, I said. He stood to leave. At the door of the conference room, he stopped and turned back. Commander Voss, he said, may I ask you a personal question? Go ahead. Are you afraid of anything? I thought about that. It was a genuine question, and it deserved a genuine answer. Yes, I said. Quite a lot of things. But not of us, he said. It was not quite a question. No, I said. Not of you. He seemed to think about that for a moment. Then he gave a small nod and left. I went back to my chair on the bridge. The ship was quiet around me, running on night rotation, most of the crew cycling through rest. The stars outside the viewport were the same stars they had always been, but they felt different now. They felt populated. I thought about the 42 civilizations, the 11,000 years of peace, the species that had come to the conclave from a position of relief, grateful, and ready to put conflict behind them. I thought about what we were. 14,000 wars, 9 billion people, wolves in the house and children who grew up playing at conflict and called it fun. A military budget that had grown, not shrunk, during our peaceful years. A culture that did not celebrate peace by forgetting what peace required. A species that had looked at the hardest parts of its own nature, and instead of flinching, had learned to aim. The galaxy had found us. It just did not know yet what kind of thing it had found. I wrote my second report that night. It was longer than the first. At the end of it, I added a note for Admiral Hargrove that read, Tavail is beginning to understand. He is going to transmit to the Conclave Council. I expect we will have more visitors soon. Some of them may not come with open hands. Hargrove's response came back within the hour, as it always did. Good, it read. Stay ready. I smiled at that. Ready. Yes, that was exactly the word. I was in the middle of breakfast when the fleet appeared. 32 ships, each of them larger than anything in our patrol group, dropping out of whatever they used for faster-than-light travel, in a spread formation that I recognized immediately as a military posture. Not a patrol spread, not a survey spread. An approach formation. The kind of shape you make with ships when you want the thing you are approaching to understand the size of what is coming at it. I left my coffee on the table and was on the bridge in 40 seconds. Time of appearance? I said, not breaking stride. 93 seconds ago, Crane said. His hands were already moving. I have 32 distinct signals. They're spread across a 200,000-kilometer front between us and Earth. Between us and Earth, I repeated. Yes, Commander. That was deliberate positioning. They had placed themselves between us and our home world. That is not what you do when you arrive with open hands. I had my fleet comm open before I reached my chair. All ships, this is Voss. Battle stations, now. The responses came in fast. 6 acknowledgements in 4 seconds. My patrol group was not large. The Relentless and her 6 escorts were never designed to hold a line against 32 ships of this size. But there are things that numbers cannot tell you about a fight before it happens, and I had learned long ago not to let numbers make decisions for me. Tavale's signal came in at the same moment, urgent and high-pitched in a way his voice had not been before. Commander Voss, these ships are Rixari. They are not part of the Conclave's delegation. Please do not engage. The Rixari are a significant power within our region of space. If you engage them, the consequences. Ambassador, I said, what are they here for? A brief pause. The Conclave's discovery of your world was transmitted through several channels before proper discretion protocols were applied. The Rixari have learned of your existence. They have, historically, taken a particular interest in newly contacted civilizations. What kind of interest? I said. The pause this time was longer. They consider the assessment of a new civilization's potential resource value to be within their rights as a major galactic power, Tavale said carefully. They came to look us over, I said. Broadly, yes. And if they decide we're useful? He did not answer that directly. He did not need to. The Rixari broadcast came across every frequency 2 minutes after their arrival. The translation was not as polished as Tavale's. It was grammatically functional and completely without warmth. Inhabitants of the 3rd planet of this star system, you are hereby given notice that your world and its resources are under assessment by the Rixari Dominion. Transmit your population census, resource inventory, and industrial capacity within 6 of your hours. Non-compliance will be treated as hostility. I listened to it twice. 6 hours. They were giving us 6 hours. Owen Crane was watching me from his station. His face was doing the careful, neutral thing again. I did not feel angry. Anger is a fuel that burns hot and fast and leaves nothing behind. What I felt was something cooler and more precise. The same thing I felt at the start of every exercise, every drill, every scenario I had ever run on the Relentless. A kind of clarifying focus that came from years of training and a very clear understanding of what the next several minutes required. I opened the fleet channel. This is Commander Voss to all ships. We have a hostile formation between us and Earth. 32 vessels in approach spread. We do not know their weapon systems, but we know their intentions. We will engage now, before they can close to effective weapons range of Luna or Earth. All wings. Intercept formation Delta. Strike pattern 3. There was a pause of about 2 seconds. That pause was not hesitation. Every captain in my patrol group was running the same calculation I had already run. They were confirming what they were hearing, checking that they had understood correctly. Then 6 acknowledgements came back, clear and professional. Commander, Tavale said, his voice urgent. Please, there are 32. Ambassador, I said, I need you to stay off this channel for the next few minutes. I cut his signal and opened the strike channel. What happened next was not what I would call a battle, in the way stories usually describe battles. There was no speeches between enemies. There was no pause for dramatic effect. There was no moment where the opposing commander was given an opportunity to reconsider. There was a threat to Earth, and there was my fleet, and there was the work of removing one from the other as efficiently as possible. The Rixari formation was designed to impress. I could see that in its geometry. It was a wide, intimidating spread, the kind of shape that works beautifully when the thing across from you sees it and reconsiders its options. It was less useful as an actual combat formation because the spacing between the ships was too wide for them to effectively support each other. They had arranged themselves to be seen, not to fight. We had arranged ourselves to fight. My 7 ships went into a tight, coordinated 3-axis approach. The outer 2 ships in my formation broke wide and fast, pushing toward the flanks of the Rixari spread. The middle 3 drove straight at the center. The Relentless and my 2nd escort held back by 40,000 kilometers, reading the engagement and directing fire. The Rixari ships reacted. They began to move, the wide spread contracting, trying to concentrate, trying to respond. But they were 800 years out of practice. I could see it in the reaction time. I could see it in the way their formation folded, ships moving without the smooth coordination that comes from regular training. They were capable ships. The technology was clearly advanced, but a capable ship in the hands of a crew that has not fought a real engagement in 8 centuries is a different thing from a capable ship in the hands of people who train every single week. My crews trained every single week. The flanking ships reached the outer edge of the Rixari formation and opened fire. I watched the readout. The Rixari shields were good. Our first pass did not break any of them, but it forced 3 of the outer Rixari ships to turn and respond, which pulled them out of their contracting formation and left a gap. My center ships hit that gap. The engagement became very fast after that, and fast is where our training paid the highest return. Every simulation, every drill, every exercise we had ever run was built on the principle that speed of decision is as important as accuracy of fire. My captains did not wait for confirmation before making adjustments. They read the engagement. They made calls. They moved. The Rixari captains, I could see, were waiting. They were consulting. They were doing the kinds of things that make sense in a political body, where consensus matters, but that will get you killed in an actual fight. 14 minutes into the engagement, 7 of the Rixari ships had broken off and were pulling back. They were not destroyed. In most cases, they were not even badly damaged. They had simply calculated the situation accurately and decided that remaining in a deteriorating formation with a human fleet inside it was not in their interest. 3 of the remaining ships attempted to shift their approach vector toward Earth, which meant going through the Relentless. They did not go through the Relentless. 19 minutes after the engagement began, the remaining Rixari vessels had retreated to a position approximately 12 million kilometers from Earth, well outside the effective weapons range of anything we had seen them use. They were grouped together, their formation now compact in the way they should have arranged it from the start. No Rixari ship had been destroyed. That was a deliberate choice on my part. Crane looked up from his board. They're holding position, no aggressive movement. I'm reading a lot of signal traffic between their vessels. They're deciding what to do, I said. What do you think they'll do? They'll talk, I said. Because the other option has already been demonstrated to not work. I reopened Tavale's channel. Ambassador, I said, we're still here. What would you like to tell me about the Rixari now that the excitement has died down? There was a very long pause. When Tavale spoke, his voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. It took me a moment to identify it. It was something close to awe, and underneath the awe, very quiet, something close to fear. Commander Voss, he said. In 19 of your minutes. They chose a poor formation, I said, and they've had a long peace. I understand. Give me a moment and I'll have a word with them. The communication I sent to the Rixari fleet was brief. I identified myself and my position. I told them that the 6-hour ultimatum they had issued had been received and considered. I told them that our answer was that Earth was not available for assessment, resource inventory, or any other examination without our explicit consent, and that our consent was not currently on offer. I told them that their fleet was welcome to remain in the outer system until their leadership made contact through proper channels, and that if they attempted to approach Earth or Luna again without invitation, we would have a different kind of conversation. Then I closed the channel and got back to managing my fleet. Neil Foss came onto the bridge 20 minutes later. He had been monitoring crew vitals during the engagement, and he had reports to file. He was the quietest man I had ever met in a crisis situation. All green, he said, setting his report on my console. We had 4 minor injuries. Nobody serious. Good, I said. He stood for a moment. Can I ask what the plan is now? We hold position. We wait for the Rixari leadership to contact us, which they will do because they have no other useful option, and we negotiate from a position of having just made our point very clearly. And Tavale? Tavale, I said, is going to have a lot more to put in his report to the conclave. Foss considered this. He seemed shaken. He was, I said. What shook him more, do you think? That we fought, or that we won? I thought about it. Both were surprising to Tavale. I was sure of that. But the fight itself, the decision to engage immediately, and without lengthy deliberation, the simple fact of not hesitating in the way he had clearly expected we might, I thought that was probably the more fundamental shock. He had come from a culture where the default response to a threat was diplomacy first, escalation only as a last resort, and after much consultation. We had gone straight to the work. That we didn't wait, I said. That there was no committee, no extended discussion. No moment where we appeared to be considering the possibility of not responding. Foss nodded slowly. And now he's wondering what else we do that quickly. Probably, I said. The Rixari leadership made contact 3 hours later, not through Tavale, and not through our open channels. They sent a tight beam signal directly to the Relentless addressed specifically to me. The voice on the other end was different from the broad anonymous broadcast they had sent earlier. It was still stiff, still without warmth, but it was also careful in a way the earlier transmission had not been. The speaker identified herself as Rixari Fleet Admiral Krash. She said that the Dominion wished to open formal communications regarding the situation that had developed. She used the phrase, "situation that had developed," to describe the engagement, which told me something about how she was going to represent events to her own leadership. "Fleet Admiral," I said, "I'm happy to talk. Tell me what you want." "The Dominion recognizes the right of the human civilization to govern its own territory," Krash said, each word placed with the care of someone reading from a prepared statement. "Good start," I said. "In return," she said, "we ask that the incident of this morning be considered resolved, and that no formal complaint be filed with the Conclave." I looked at Crane, who was listening from his station. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Fleet Admiral," I said, "I'll consider that request. I'll need something from you in return." A pause. "What would you require?" "An acknowledgement," I said. "Not for the Conclave. Not for any record. Just between us." Another pause. "What kind of acknowledgement?" "That you understand," I said, "that the 6-hour window you gave us this morning was not something we were ever going to use in the way you intended." A long silence. "Yes," Krash said finally. "We understand that." "Good," I said. "Then we're resolved. I won't be filing with the Conclave." She disconnected without another word. Crane let out a long breath. "That's it?" "That's it," I said. "No formal complaint, no Conclave involvement, no record." "No record," I said. "But she knows. Her fleet captains know. And word travels." He thought about that. "It travels better without a formal record?" "Much better," I said. "A formal record is something you can debate and contextualize and argue about in council chambers. What happened this morning, on the other hand, is something her captains saw with their own eyes, and they'll carry it home with them, and they'll tell the story in the way people always tell the stories they carry home, from the places where things didn't go the way they planned." Crane was quiet for a moment. "That's not a bad way to get a message out," he said. "No," I said. "It's not." I sat back in my chair and looked out at the stars, and at the distant cluster of lights that was the retreating Rixari fleet. They were going home, with something they had not come here with. Not a record, not a treaty, not a formal declaration of any kind, just a story. And the story would do exactly what I needed it to do. After the communications with Krash concluded, the bridge settled into the kind of quiet that follows intense action. Not an empty quiet, a full one, weighted with what had just happened, and what it meant. My crew moved through their post-engagement checklists with the steady efficiency of people who had trained for exactly this kind of moment, and in their professionalism, I found something I always found in those minutes after a significant action. A quiet pride that I never expressed aloud, because expressing it aloud would have diminished it. Owen Crane finished his system audit and leaned back in his chair for a moment with the careful exhaustion of someone who has been running on high attention for several hours. He looked across the bridge at me. "I keep thinking about that formation," he said. "The spread they came in. What about it? They built it to be seen," he said. "Not to work. The spacing was wrong for mutual support. The positioning was wrong for a coordinated approach. It was designed to look like something overwhelming. It would have been overwhelming," I said, "against a species that responded the way they expected. But we didn't," he said. "No." He was quiet for a moment. "How long do you think it has been since anyone responded to them the way we did?" I thought about that. The Rixari Dominion had been a major galactic power, by Taval's account, for a significant portion of the Conclave's history. 800 years without a serious military engagement. Long enough for the habits of genuine combat readiness to fade, to be replaced by the performance of readiness, the visual display of force, rather than its practiced substance. It was a trap that any military could fall into given sufficient peace, and I had spent my career watching our own services work consciously against it, because the people who built our training programs understood exactly what peace could do to a fighting force if you let it. "Probably a very long time," I said. Crane nodded slowly. They're going to go back and retrain, he said. After this. Good, I said. That's the right response. He looked at me. You want them to get better? I want everyone in this galaxy to be better than they currently are, I said. A galaxy full of capable, prepared, well-trained defense forces is safer than one where only we bother. The goal is not to be the only ones who can fight. The goal is to make sure nobody has to fight alone. He thought about that for a moment. It was clearly not a framework he had considered before, and I watched him turn it over in his mind, with the careful thoroughness that made him good at his job. That's a long view, he said. That's the only view worth having, I said. Neil Foss came back onto the bridge a little while later, with updated crew reports, and we spent the next hour processing the administrative reality of what had happened. Reports to file. System damage assessments, minor but present. Communication logs to archive. All the quiet paperwork of a day that had been anything but quiet. I handled it the way I handled all of it, systematically and without rushing, because the paperwork was part of the work, and the work did not become less important because the exciting part was over. Tavale sent a final communication late in the evening. It was brief. He said that he had completed his own preliminary report to the Conclave Council, and that he wanted me to know, before he transmitted it, that he had described the engagement as accurately and completely as he was able. He said that he had not softened or contextualized any aspect of it, because he believed the Council needed to understand exactly what had happened, rather than a version of it that was easier to absorb. I thanked him for that. I meant it. There is one thing I am uncertain how to phrase, he said. May I ask your advice? Of course, I said. When I describe the decision to engage, he said, I want to characterize it accurately. You made the decision within minutes of receiving the Rixari ultimatum. There was no extended deliberation. There was no formal consultation with your planetary leadership, no committee process, no request for authorization. There was not, I confirmed. And this was not a failure of process, he said. It was not quite a question. No, I said. My commission gives me operational authority in the defense of the solar system. The Rixari positioned their fleet in an aggressive formation between my patrol group and Earth. The decision fell within my authority and my judgment. There will be a review after the fact, as there always is, and my command will evaluate whether my judgment was correct. But the decision was mine to make in the moment. I see, he said, and I could tell he was still absorbing the shape of this, the structure of a system that delegated real authority to commanders at the point of action, and evaluated that authority through review, rather than prior permission. It is efficient, he said finally. It has to be, I said. Permission seeking takes time. Threats do not wait for permission seeking to conclude. He absorbed this. I will describe it accurately, he said. I know you will, I said. That's why I'm glad you're the one writing the report. He signed off, and I finished my own logs, and the day that had begun with 32 unfamiliar ships in a hostile formation ended with quiet stars outside the viewport and a fleet that had answered a question clearly and professionally and gone back to its regular work. That was how we operated. That was how we had always operated. The answer is given. The work continues. The summons from the Conclave Council arrived 6 days after the Rixari withdrew. Tavale delivered it in person, which told me he had been asked to. A summons of this kind from the Council was usually sent through formal diplomatic channels, layers of official communication wrapped in the careful language of interstellar governance. The fact that Tavale brought it himself, and that he brought it with a look on his face that was working hard to be neutral, told me the Council had understood that our situation required a more careful approach than their standard procedures allowed for. I accepted the summons. I told Tavale I would need 48 hours to arrange transport, and that I would attend alone. He told me that other Conclave member species would be sending delegations of up to 12 individuals. I told him I was comfortable with that. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I was beginning to recognize. It was the expression he had whenever I said something that technically made sense, but that he could not entirely absorb. Alone, he said again. Alone, I confirmed. I spent the 48 hours doing two things. The first was briefing Admiral Hargrove and the Council on Earth on everything that had happened since first contact, including the Rixari engagement, in sufficient detail that they would be prepared for whatever came next. The second thing I did was prepare for my testimony. Testifying before 42 civilizations is not like testifying before a human court or a human legislature. I had never done anything like it, but the principles, I decided, were the same. Know what you want to say. Know why you want to say it. Say it directly, without apology, and without wasting the room's time with anything that does not serve your purpose. The Aethori vessel carried me to the Conclave's regional assembly station, a structure large enough to make the Aethori ship look modest, positioned at a Lagrange point between two of the outer planets of a nearby system. The journey took 11 hours. I spent most of it reviewing the Conclave's publicly shared records, learning as much as I could about the 42 species, their histories, their values, the things they had agreed to when they joined, and the things they had given up. The assembly chamber was large enough to make me feel very small, which I suspected was partly intentional. The ceiling was high enough to disappear into. The space was arranged in a wide oval, with tiered seating for delegations arranged around a central floor space. Every seat was filled. The chamber held hundreds of beings, representing 42 distinct species, and every single set of eyes in it turned to look at me when I walked in. I had come in my formal service uniform. I had the sidearm at my hip that I always carried. I had nothing else. I walked to the center of the floor and stopped. The being who opened the session was the council's current presiding officer, a small, dense-bodied creature called a Veth, the oldest species in the conclave with over 12,000 years of membership. Her voice came through the universal translation system as low and measured, each word placed with the care of someone who has been speaking in formal settings for a very long time. She said that the council had called this session to address the situation arising from Earth's contact and the recent incident involving the Rixari Dominion. She said the council wished to hear from Earth's representative directly. She looked at me. "Commander Voss," she said, "you may speak." I had thought carefully about how to begin. In the end, I decided the most useful thing I could do was not explain, not defend, and not apologize. The most useful thing I could do was tell the truth plainly and let the room decide what to do with it. "Thank you," I said. "I'll try to be clear, because clarity seems like the most respectful thing I can offer you." I paused for a moment, looking around the chamber. Hundreds of faces, dozens of kinds of eyes, body shapes that ranged from something close to human to things that had no reference point in any catalog I had ever studied. They were all watching me. They were all waiting. "The Rixari came to my solar system," I said. "They positioned their fleet between my patrol group and my home world, and they transmitted a message that was a demand, not a greeting. They gave us 6 hours to comply. We engaged them instead." A sound moved through the chamber. Not words, just the sound of hundreds of beings processing something. "I want to address the question I expect this council has about that decision," I said. "You are probably wondering why we did not wait, why we did not attempt communication first, why we did not explore diplomatic options before engaging." I looked at the presiding Veth officer. "The answer is that when someone places a fleet between you and your home and gives you a countdown, they are not waiting for a diplomatic response. They are waiting to see if you will comply. We chose to give them a different answer." Another sound through the chamber. I let it settle. "But that is not actually what I want to talk to you about today," I said. "The Rixari situation is, in some ways, the simplest part of what we need to discuss. What I think you need to understand is what the Rixari encountered when they came to our system, not because it was unusual for us, because it was entirely usual. I had their attention. Every being in the room, as far as I could tell, was watching me without distraction. My species evolved on a world with a very specific biological environment," I said. "I want to describe that environment to you, because I think it explains almost everything about us that has puzzled the Conclave's team since contact began." I described Earth, not the beautiful Earth, not the blue sphere hanging in space, not the version of Earth that appears in our photographs taken from orbit. I described the Earth our ancestors grew up on, the one shaped by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary pressure, the one where everything that ate also got eaten, where every predator was also someone's prey, where the chemistry of survival ran through every living thing on the planet. I described what humans are, specifically, in that environment. "We are endurance hunters," I said. "Our early ancestors did not have the fastest speed, the sharpest claws, or the most effective natural weapons compared to many other animals on our world. What we had was the ability to maintain physical effort over very long periods of time, combined with the cognitive ability to track and anticipate prey behavior. We ran things to death, literally. The prey was faster, we were not. But we followed. We kept following. We did not stop. We did this for hundreds of thousands of years. The chamber was extremely quiet. The animal we most closely domesticated, I said, is a predator called the gray wolf. We domesticated it approximately 15 to 30,000 years ago, depending on how you date the evidence. The domestic descendant of the wolf is now one of the most common companion animals on our planet. We raise them in our homes. Our children grow up with them. We love them. I waited a moment. I am telling you this, I said, because I want you to understand that we are not a species that is at war with its own nature. We are a species that looked at our nature very carefully and found a way to work with it. We did not become peaceful by suppressing what we are. We became peaceful, to the extent that we are peaceful, by channeling what we are into structures and institutions and agreements that manage it. The underlying nature remains. The presiding Veth officer spoke. Her voice was level, but something underneath it was not. Commander Voss, the species represented in this chamber have all undergone significant cultural, and in some cases, biological changes, to reduce aggressive behavior. This was considered a prerequisite of civilized galactic membership. Are you telling this council that your species has not undergone that process? I am telling you, I said, that we have undergone a different process. We did not reduce our capacity for conflict. We developed our capacity for judgment about when to use it. A ripple through the chamber. Not anger, something more complicated. A tall being near the front, a species I recognized from the records as the Shen, spoke without being recognized by the chair. Their translator rendered it as, "This is exactly what every species said before the great conflicts. Every civilization that has caused catastrophic harm to others said they had good judgment about when to act." That's true, I said, and I take the point seriously. But there's a difference between a civilization that has never examined the cost of its aggression and one that has. Our history is a very detailed record of examining those costs. We have written more extensively about the consequences of conflict than perhaps any other subject in our entire cultural output. We study it. We teach it to our children. We have spent thousands of years developing international law and military ethics and the structures of accountability because we understood, from direct experience, what happens when those things are absent. The Shen did not appear entirely satisfied, but they sat back. "You said you chose peace," said the Veth officer. "Provisionally, I believe the word was." "Yes," I said. "What would change the provision?" I looked at her steadily. "Someone making a serious, sustained attempt to harm us, or to harm people we have agreed to protect." "And the Rixari?" "Made an attempt," I said. "A brief one. It did not go well for them." Another sound through the chamber. I was getting better at reading the qualities of sound in a room full of alien beings. This one was not agreement. It was not disagreement either. It was something more like the collective sound of a room that was simultaneously unsettled and very alert. The questioning continued for another 2 hours. Species I had never heard of asked questions through their translators. Some were hostile in their framing. Some were genuinely curious. A few, near the back of the chamber, asked nothing, but watched me with an intensity that was in itself a kind of communication. One question came from a small, round-bodied delegate from a species called the Urathi, and it was the one I thought about most in the days that followed. "Commander," she said, "you described your species as hunters. You described a history of continuous conflict. You described a nature that you did not suppress but only, as you say, channeled. And yet you are here, alone, before 42 civilizations, having flown through space in a vessel belonging to the people you just fought alongside, to explain yourself to a council whose authority you have not accepted, and whose traditions you apparently find less than fully applicable to your situation." "That's a fair summary," I said. "Then why are you here?" she said. "If your civilization does not need this council's approval, if your military is clearly capable of managing threats on its own terms, if the provision of your peace is something only you get to define, what do you want from us?" I had thought about this question, or something close to it, on the 11-hour journey here. The same thing anyone wants from their neighbors, I said. A good arrangement. You have things we want. 12,000 years of science and knowledge and star map coverage that we haven't developed yet. Trade networks that could significantly benefit our planet. Access to technologies that took you millennia to develop, and that would take us longer. We have things you want, even if you haven't fully cataloged them yet. We can be useful to each other. And if the arrangement stops being good? The Arathi delegate asked. Then we renegotiate, I said. That is what civilized parties do. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, she said something that her translator rendered as, "You are the most honest thing I have heard in 11,000 years of conclave sessions." I did not know entirely how to respond to that, so I said thank you, and I meant it. The session ended without a formal vote. The Veth officer explained that the council would deliberate and respond through diplomatic channels. Taveo looked at me from his delegation's tier, with an expression I was starting to be able to read more accurately. He looked like a man who had brought a guest to a dinner party, and is only now realizing that the guest has fundamentally changed the nature of the evening. I walked out of the chamber alone, the way I had walked in, and behind me the sound of the council beginning its deliberation followed me out into the corridor. On the journey back, Tavale sat with me in the small conference room of his vessel. He said nothing for a long time. Outside the viewport, stars moved in the slow-seeming way they always do when you are going very fast. "You knew exactly what you were going to say," he said at last. "I spent 48 hours preparing," I said. "And before that? When the Rixari came?" "I spent 12 years preparing for that," I said. He looked at me with his steady amber eyes. "Yara," he said. It was the first time he had used my name rather than my rank. "I want to ask you something." "Ask," I said. "Do you know what you are?" he said. "Not what your species is. You, personally. Do you understand what the rest of this galaxy is going to make of you?" I thought about that. "I think they're going to have to decide what to make of us," I said. "We're not going to decide it for them." He considered this. Then he said, "The Conclave has not encountered anything like you. I have been an ambassador for 40 years. I have met representatives of 11 different species at the point of first contact. Not one of them came to the council and told 42 civilizations, calmly and without apparent concern, that their nature was not something they had suppressed. I think honesty was the right approach," I said. "It was brave," he said. "Or it was something that I don't have a word for, which is what bravery looks like when the person being brave doesn't fully register that they should be afraid." I looked out the viewport at the stars. "I know what should be frightening about that room," I said. I chose to focus on what I wanted to accomplish instead. He was quiet. "That," he said softly, "is the most human sentence I have heard since I landed in your docking bay." On the journey back from the Conclave station, I had 11 hours to think about what had happened in the chamber, and I used most of them doing exactly that. Tavale was quiet for much of the journey, in the way he was quiet when he was processing something, organizing his thoughts into the structure of a report that would go to people who had not been in the room. I organized my own thoughts differently, not into a report but into an understanding. The 42 civilizations in that chamber had each arrived at the conclave through a version of the same path: conflict, consequence, exhaustion, and then the deliberate choice to build something different. They had all looked at the cost of what they had been and decided to change it. That decision had produced 11,000 years of relative stability across a significant part of the galaxy, and I was not prepared to dismiss that achievement. It was real. Tavale was not wrong when he described it as genuinely good. What I kept returning to was the difference between changing what you are and changing what you do with what you are. The Conclave's member species had, as best I could determine, attempted the former. The shift toward peace had involved not just changes in behavior and policy, but changes in culture, in values, in some cases in biological predisposition, through the long pressure of social selection. They had become, over generations and centuries, less inclined toward the things that led to conflict. That was the root of their peace, and it was a real and durable root. We had done something else. We had not become less inclined. We had become more precise. Every conflict in our history had sharpened something, refined something, built something, that the next generation inherited and added to. We had not burned the fuel of our nature until it ran out. We had learned to aim it. I was not certain which approach was superior, in an absolute sense. I was fairly certain they produced different outcomes in specific situations, and that the specific situation we had just been in at the council session had demonstrated one of those outcomes clearly. The Arathi delegate's question had stayed with me. What are you trying to build? It was a simpler question than any of the others, and the simplest questions are usually the most difficult to answer well. I had said we were trying to build a civilization worth defending. I believed that was true. But sitting in Tavail's conference room, watching the stars move past the viewport, I thought about the fuller version of the answer, the one I had not given in the chamber, because the chamber had not been the right place for it, and because some things are better kept for quieter moments. What we were trying to build was the same thing humans had always been trying to build, iteration by iteration, generation by generation, with every failure examined and every partial success carried forward. We were trying to build something that could last. Not just last as in continue to exist, but last as in continue to deserve to exist, continue to grow in the ways that mattered, continue to be, on the whole, better than we had been before, in the genuine sense of that word, rather than the comfortable sense. We had not always succeeded. The archive made that clear enough. 4,000 years of evidence of every way that the project had gone wrong, every time that the knowledge of what was right had not been sufficient to prevent what was wrong, but the project had continued. Every generation had picked it up. That was not a small thing. In a galaxy of 42 civilizations, some of them 12,000 years old, I thought it was worth saying plainly that the thing we were most proud of was not any specific achievement, not any technology or treaty or victory, but the fact that we had never permanently quit on the project itself. We had come close, more than once. The archive had those records too, but close was not the same as done, and we were still here, and the project was still running. Tavail refilled both of our cups. The liquid he had prepared for me was something Athori and I had developed a tolerance for over the weeks of our acquaintance, though I had not developed a preference. But I drank it because it was offered with genuine hospitality, and genuine hospitality deserved acknowledgement, regardless of the beverage. The council will deliberate for some time, he said. These decisions move slowly. I'm patient, I said. He smiled. Yes, I have noticed. Is that unusual? I asked. Among new contact species? Very, he said. Most species at this stage are eager. They want to know everything immediately. They want to see the star maps, learn the technology, access the databases. The impatience is completely understandable. There is a great deal to want. We want all of that, I said. We want it very much. But, he said, I've learned that wanting something intensely and acting urgently from that want are not the same thing, I said. The star maps are not going anywhere. The knowledge will still be there. The more important thing right now is to establish the relationship correctly, and relationships established under pressure of impatience tend to be weaker than ones established with patience. He looked at me for a long moment. You speak, he said carefully, as if you have experience with this. Thousands of years of recorded diplomatic history, I said. We study our mistakes. At length, he laughed. It was the first time I had heard Tavail laugh, and it was a pleasant sound, warm and genuine, the kind of laugh that comes from something actually being funny, rather than something being politely treated as funny. I believe you, he said. I genuinely believe you. We flew on through the dark, the stars patient around us, and somewhere behind us, the council deliberated, and somewhere ahead of us, Earth turned in its slow orbit, 9 billion people living their lives in complete unawareness that their representative was drinking something warm and terrible in a conference room aboard an alien vessel, and thinking about the long future of a species that had decided, a very long time ago, to keep going. The signal came from the intergalactic void, and it was nothing like the Athori's mathematical greeting. I was aboard the Relentless, 3 weeks after the council session, when long-range sensors flagged something at the absolute edge of our detection range. It was faint. It was intermittent. It was moving, not drifting, not following any gravitational curve that made sense from a natural object, moving with direction and purpose, coming from a region of space between galaxies where nothing natural should be. Crane picked it up first. He sat at his console for almost 4 minutes without saying anything, running it through filters and cross-checks, and every diagnostic he had available. Then he turned to me, and he did not look the way he usually looked when he had a reading he was uncertain about. He looked the way he looked when he was completely certain, and the certainty was the problem. "Commander," he said, "you need to see this." I crossed to his station and looked at the screen. The object, if it could be called that, was approximately 800 light-hours away. It was massive, difficult to characterize precisely, because its shape, such as we could read it at this range, was not consistent. It changed on the sensor readout in ways that solid objects do not. It was absorbing certain electromagnetic frequencies and not others. It was leaving a trail in the background radiation that curved in ways that suggested something much larger than the central mass. I looked at it for a long time. "Send everything we have on this to Tavail," I said, "right now." Tavail's response came back in under 7 minutes, which was faster than anything non-emergency in our communications had ever come back. The speed alone told me something. When his face appeared on my screen, he was standing rather than sitting, and the 2 members of his crew visible behind him were moving quickly in the background. "Commander Voss," he said, "where did this reading come from?" I gave him the coordinates. He looked at something off-screen that I could not see, and his expression did something I had not seen it do in all our weeks of contact. It became very still. Not calm still, the way Tavail usually was. Still in the way a person goes still, when they hear something that reaches past their composure, and touches something much older. "Tavail," I said, "what is that?" He looked back at me. "It has many names in different conclave languages," he said. "The common translation is the Maw. It is the oldest recorded threat in the conclave's history. There are records of its activity going back 2 billion years. 2 billion years, I repeated. "It is not biological, in any conventional sense," he said. "We do not fully understand what it is. What we know is that the 3 civilizations it has encountered have not survived those encounters." I looked at the reading on Crane's screen. 3 civilizations in 2 billion years. That was not a rapid threat. It was a slow, vast, ancient thing that moved on timescales that made human history look like an afternoon. "Is it heading here?" I asked. "Based on your coordinates and its apparent trajectory," he said, "it will reach the inner regions of this galactic arm in approximately 4 months. 4 months. "Tavail," I said, "what is the standard conclave response protocol for the Maw?" He looked at me very steadily. "There is no engagement protocol," he said. "There is an evacuation protocol. It has not been updated in 11,000 years, but it was written the last time the Maw was active, and it is still considered the only viable response." "Evacuation," I said. "Yes." "Of what?" "Of everything in its path," he said. "Multiple worlds, the conclave's regional hub in this sector, research installations, populated stations." I thought for a moment. How many people? He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, across all affected installations and worlds, approximately 400 million individuals. "And where do they go?" "The conclave has maintained refuge worlds," he said. "Deep systems, outside the Maw's historical range. It has been done before. It is survivable. It is not." He stopped. "Say it," I said. "It is not a solution," he said. "It removes people from the path." The Maw continues. "It has always continued. The civilizations it destroyed were not destroyed in a single pass. They were eroded, world by world, over centuries, as the Maw moved and they moved ahead of it, and eventually there was nowhere left to move. The bridge was very quiet. My crew had their backs professionally straight and their eyes on their consoles, but I could feel the weight of what had just been said settling over the room. "Tavail," I said, "I need an hour. Then I'm going to call you back." I closed the channel and turned to my bridge. Everyone looked at me. "Start evacuation notifications to Fleet Command," I said. "I want Earth and Luna informed of this reading within the next 20 minutes. Then I want our full tactical database on the Rixari engagement pulled up, and I want Lieutenant Crane and Lieutenant Commander Adler to begin a preliminary analysis of the Maw's sensor profile with an eye toward identifying any weakness in its electromagnetic behavior that could be relevant to weapons application." Crane blinked. "Commander, did you say weapons application?" "I did," I said. He looked at the sensor readout. He looked back at me. "Aye, Commander," he said, and turned to his board. Dara Hollis, my senior engineer, looked up from her station. You want to fight it? I want to know if it can be fought, I said. Those are different questions. Start with the second one. The hour I had asked for became 3, because there was a great deal to do. I briefed Admiral Hargrove, who listened in the particular way he had when something was outside any prepared scenario, and he was building his response from first principles. He asked 2 questions. One was about the Conclave's evacuation timeline. One was about our weapons capability relative to the target. I gave him my honest assessment of both. When I called Tavale back, he was in his own chair now, but around him the ship was clearly in motion. I could feel the vibration in the image. They were already moving. You're leaving, I said. We have initiated the evacuation protocols, he said. It is the responsible action. Commander, I urge you strongly to advise your leadership to begin evacuation planning for the Earth system as well. The Maw's path will bring it within range of your sun. I understand, I said. Tavale, I need to ask you a direct question. Ask it. In 11,000 years of Conclave records, in 2 billion years of documented Maw activity, has any civilization ever attempted to engage it directly? He was quiet. There are fragmentary records of one attempt, he said at last, by one of the 3 civilizations that no longer exists. They committed their entire military fleet. The records from that period end shortly afterward. How shortly? The last transmission from that civilization was received 47 days after the attempt. I thought about that, and no one has tried since. No one had a military to try with, he said quietly. The Conclave's member species have maintained peacekeeping forces, patrol vessels, installation security. Nothing that was designed for a conflict of this kind. There was no point. The understanding has always been that the Maw is not something you fight. It is something you endure and outlast. And has that worked? I said. The question sat in the air. The 3 civilizations it encountered fully did not survive, he said finally. The Conclave has not encountered it directly, in force, before now. We have moved assets out of its path in the past, and it has moved on. Moved on to the next place, I said. Yes. Tavale, I said. I respect the evacuation protocol. I understand why it exists, and I am not criticizing the Conclave for having it. But I need you to understand that we are not going to file evacuation orders for the Earth system. He looked at me for a long moment. Commander, he said carefully, I understand that your species has a strong tendency toward not running, I said. Yes, I know. The Maw has ended civilizations. I know that too. Your fleet is 7 ships, and whatever you can assemble in 4 months. My fleet, I said, is the Navy of the United Earth Federation, and what it can assemble in 4 months is considerably more than 7 ships. He was quiet. Tavale, I said, I am not asking you to fight. I am not asking the Conclave to engage. You have a responsibility to your member species, and the people in the Maw's path, and the evacuation protocol is how you meet that responsibility. I support that. But someone has to stay. Why? He said, and his voice was not dismissive. It was genuinely asking, why would you do this? Because if we run, it keeps going, I said. Because the evacuation protocol is a very good answer to the immediate problem, and no answer at all to the long-term one. Because in 4 months there will be a fleet in this system and a species that does not evacuate in front of threats. And whether or not we succeed, the Conclave needs to see what happens when something stands instead of runs. He looked at me for a long time. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a person who is hearing something they have not heard before and is giving it the full weight of their attention. You know you might lose, he said. I know, I said. We've lost before. We keep going anyway. He said nothing for almost a full minute. Then he said, I will stay with your fleet. I looked at him. Tavale, you don't have to. I know I do not have to, he said. My duties require that I facilitate the Conclave's evacuation of its assets in this sector, which I will do. But I am an ambassador. My other duty is to represent the Conclave in significant events. And I believe, he said, with a look that I did not entirely know how to interpret, that what you are about to do qualifies as significant. I looked at him for a moment. Thank you, I said. He gave me a small, formal nod. Then he looked off to the side for a moment. And when he looked back, there was something different in his expression, something that I had not seen in it before, in all our weeks of contact. Something that looked, more than anything I had yet observed in him, like something you might call respect. "Commander Voss," he said, "may I ask what you are thinking right now?" I looked out the viewport at the stars, at the sensor readout still showing that vast, slow-moving thing in the dark at the edge of our range, at the numbers on Crane's screen, the preliminary analysis just beginning, the first attempts to find something in the Maw's behavior that a human weapon might use. "I'm thinking," I said, "that we have 4 months, and 4 months is enough time to get ready if we use it correctly." He nodded slowly. "I am beginning," he said, "to understand what you mean when you use that word." "Which word?" I said. "Ready," he said. I turned back to my bridge and started giving orders. There was an enormous amount of work to do, and not a single moment of it could be wasted. The galaxy was watching. More importantly, something old and terrible was coming. And for the first time in 11,000 years of recorded galactic history, something had decided not to get out of its way. The 4 months of preparation were the most intensive period of sustained effort I had experienced in my career, and my career had not lacked for intensive periods. Admiral Hargrove came to the Relentless himself in the second week, which was unusual enough that every crew member on the ship noticed it. He was not a man who traveled to ships when he could communicate remotely. He came in person because some conversations require it, and he and I sat together in my quarters for 3 hours, with the sensor data spread between us, and we talked through everything we had, and everything we lacked, and what we might be able to build in the time available. The conversations with the scientific community on Earth and Luna were happening simultaneously, conducted by a team that worked parallel to the military preparation and fed its conclusions directly into our planning. The people running those conversations were physicists and engineers and materials scientists and systems theorists, and their job was to look at the Maw's electromagnetic profile with the same kind of focused attention that a doctor brings to an illness, looking for the specific mechanism that produced the specific behavior, looking for the lever that might change the outcome. They found the frequency sensitivity in week 3, not the full picture of what it meant, but the initial observation that certain electromagnetic outputs produced measurable changes in the Maw's behavior. That observation became the foundation of the strategy, and the strategy was refined over the following weeks, through a process that I have always found one of the more remarkable things humans do, which is the process of people who are very good at different things, talking intensively to each other, until something emerges that none of them could have produced alone. The fleet assembly happened in parallel with all of this. Ships were requisitioned, modified, armed. Crews were assembled, briefed, trained in the specific protocols that the strategy required. The work at the Mars yards ran around the clock, because there was no other option, and the people doing that work knew exactly what they were building for, and did not slow down. Tavail watched all of this from his vessel, which he had repositioned to remain in the system during the preparation period. He sent me a message in week 5 that I have kept in my personal files because I thought it was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. It read, "I have been observing your preparation. I do not have a reference point for what I am watching. The closest thing in my experience is the Conclave's founding period, the 11 years during which the original member species built the institutions and frameworks that became the Conclave's structure. But that was political construction. This is different. This feels like something that has been practiced for so long that it no longer requires effort to initiate, as if you were not preparing for something you had never done, as if you were preparing for something you had always known would eventually arrive." I read that message several times. He was not wrong. There is a quality to human military preparation that, from the inside, can be difficult to perceive because you are in the middle of it and it simply feels like work. But what Tavail was observing from the outside, the efficiency, the speed, the absence of hesitation or existential recalibration, was the product of exactly what he had named: practice. Centuries of it. Not practice of this specific scenario, which was unprecedented, but practice of the underlying skill set. The ability to assess a threat, build a response, organize the people and resources required for that response, and move. We had been doing it in various forms for the entirety of our recorded history, and the muscle memory of it was so deeply embedded in our institutions, and our training, and our culture, that it ran even when the circumstances were new. I wrote back to Tavail. I told him he was exactly right, and I told him that I thought it was important for him to report that accurately to the council, not as a boast, as a data point, because the thing he was observing was something the galaxy needed to understand about us, and the engagement ahead was going to provide more data points, and all of it together would give the conclave a clearer picture of what they had found when they found Earth. He replied that he would. Then he added one more line. "I am not afraid of you," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I was uncertain, in the early days. Now I am not afraid. I am something else. I think the word in your language is reassured." I read that line 3 times too. Reassured. By us. By a species that had just spent 4 months building a war fleet to engage something that had ended civilizations. I thought I understood what he meant, and I thought it was, possibly, the most significant thing anyone had said to me in the entire span of this extraordinary series of events. We were terrifying, and we were reassuring, and the two things were not in conflict. They were the same thing from different angles. The thing that made us capable of doing what we were about to do was the same thing that made us worth standing beside when it was done. The capacity and the character were not separate. They were one nature, directed. I put Tavail's message in my personal file, alongside the 914 names that I had not yet written, because the engagement had not yet happened, but whose eventual presence I already felt in the preparation around me. The cost that any real effort at a real thing eventually requires. I went back to work. There was always more work, and the work was the most important thing, until the work was done. The Maw reached weapons range on a Tuesday. I know that sounds like an odd detail to begin with, a specific day of the week, but that is exactly how I remember it. The day of week is the kind of small, ordinary thing that your mind holds on to when everything else around it is very large and very serious. It was a Tuesday in November, and it was cold aboard the Relentless because we had rerouted some of the heating power to the weapons systems, and my crew had been at their stations for 16 hours straight, and the Maw had arrived, and it was time. 4 months of preparation had produced a fleet that even I, who had approved every requisition and signed every activation order, found staggering when I looked at it on the formation display. We had 93 ships, not a fleet in the traditional sense, because the United Earth Federation had never needed a fleet of this scale, and had never built one. These were ships pulled from every branch of service, converted cargo haulers with weapons mounted, research vessels reinforced, the new strike craft that the yards on Mars had produced, in a building program that had run 24 hours a day for 16 weeks. 93 ships and approximately 40,000 crew members, and every one of them knew exactly what they were about to do. The Conclave had completed its evacuations. Tavail's ship was the only Conclave vessel remaining in the system, and Tavail had positioned it at a distance of 5 million kilometers from our rearmost formation, close enough to observe, far enough to stay out of any engagement envelope. He had offered, once, to participate in whatever way might be useful. I had told him to stay clear and watch. He needed to see this, not for his own sake, but for what he would carry back afterward. Crane's analysis, refined over 4 months by the best scientific and military minds we had available, had found something in the Maw's electromagnetic profile. Not a weakness, exactly. Nothing so clean as a vulnerability. More of a behavior pattern, a tendency. When the Maw encountered energy at certain frequencies, it oriented toward it, the way any predator orients toward movement. It was not intelligent in any way we could clearly measure, but it was responsive. You could draw its attention, and a thing whose attention you can direct is a thing you can position. The strategy was built on that one fact. We could not fight the Maw the way you fight a ship. There were no systems to disable, no command structure to disrupt, no single point that, destroyed, would end the engagement. The Maw was a mass of post-biological matter, with the behavioral characteristics of a very old and very large predator. You did not fight it by attacking its heart. You fought it by being more persistent than it was, by controlling the engagement ground, by using its own behaviors against it until it did not have enough mass remaining to sustain itself. That was the theory. It was a good theory. Theory and the first few hours of a thing that has never been done before are different kinds of realities. The Maw hit the edge of our formation at 0847 on that Tuesday morning, and within the first 11 minutes I had lost 4 ships. I want to be honest about what that means. 4 ships is not a number on a display. It is not a strategic variable in a simulation. It is 4 crews, each running between 300 and 400 people, and every one of them is someone who woke up that morning in a bunk aboard their vessel and ate something and drank their coffee or their tea or whatever they drink, and thought about the task ahead with the particular kind of focused calm that training produces, and took their station and did their job, and then the maw was there and they were not. I wrote down every ship name. I wrote it in my personal log at 0858, 11 minutes into the engagement, while the battle was still happening around me, because I had decided before the first moment of contact that I was going to maintain the log in real time, not for history, for myself, so that the weight of what was being spent never became abstract to me in the middle of the work. The work demanded my full concentration, and I gave it. The positioning strategy worked in the way a blueprint works, meaning that the principles held but the execution required constant adjustment. The maw responded to our frequency emitters more or less as the analysis predicted, but the response was not consistent. There were variations, shifts in its behavior that suggested something like learning, not conscious learning, but the kind of behavioral adaptation that very old predators develop over time. It was not intelligent, but it was experienced in ways that predated our civilization by an enormous margin. We adapted faster. My captains were in continuous communication with my command vessel, and I made decisions in the same way I had made the decision to engage the Rixari, without extensive consultation, without committees, without the kind of deliberative process that works for planning and is lethal for fighting. The battle unfolded over 11 days, and for 11 days the bridge of the Relentless was the calmest place I knew how to make it, which meant controlled and focused, and running on 2 hours of sleep per cycle, and the kind of determination that does not look, from the outside, like determination at all. It just looks like someone doing their job. Day 3, we lost another 6 ships. Day 5, we figured out a refinement to the frequency emitters that gave us better control over the maw's orientation, and for 18 hours, we were able to maintain almost perfect positioning, drawing it away from the inner planets and keeping it in a zone of space where our fire was concentrated and effective. Then it shifted again, and we lost 2 more in the adjustment. Day 7, I had not slept in 31 hours, and Dara Hollis came to my station with something that smelled like coffee, and was not quite coffee, because we were rationing real coffee by that point, and she set it down next to me and said nothing, just set it down, and went back to her station. I drank it without looking up from the readout. It tasted terrible. It was the best thing I had consumed in 3 days. The numbers were brutal. The maw was, undeniably, getting smaller. The mass readings confirmed it. The constant concentrated fire, the attrition strategy, the way we kept it in a zone of engagement rather than letting it drift or reorient, was working. Slowly. Painfully slowly. Slowly enough that the losses were beginning to raise a question that I addressed once and only once, in a command meeting on day 8. Lieutenant Commander Adler raised it. He was my tactical officer, one of the best I had ever served with, and he had the kind of mind that could hold the entire picture in focus without losing any of its component parts. He was not being defeatist. He was being accurate. Our rate of effectiveness versus the maw's rate of adaptation, he said, laying his analysis on the briefing table, gives us a narrow margin. If the maw fully adapts to our current frequency strategy before its mass drops below the threshold we've estimated for self-sustaining operation, the engagement outcome changes. How narrow is the margin? I asked. 11% uncertainty, he said, meaning there is an 11% probability that the engagement does not reach the projected conclusion. And the other 89%? I said. The strategy holds, he said. I looked at the analysis. I looked at him. Then we operate on the 89%, I said. Thank you. He nodded, and the meeting continued. That was the only time the question was raised. Tavail contacted me on day 9. He had been maintaining silence throughout the engagement, respecting the operational space, and when he broke it, I knew it was for something he considered necessary. Commander Voss, he said, I have been observing the engagement from my position. I want to tell you something. Go ahead, I said. The Conclave's long-range observation network has been relaying this engagement to the Council in real time, he said. 42 civilizations have been watching what you are doing for 9 days. I had known the observation network existed. I had not fully considered, in the press of those 9 days, that it was being watched. "And," I said, "there is significant debate," he said carefully, "about the implications of what they are seeing, about what it means that a civilization that joined the Conclave's awareness 6 weeks ago, that we had categorized as newly emerged, has assembled a fleet of this size and is engaging the Maw in direct combat, while the Conclave evacuates." "I imagine that's a complicated conversation," I said. "It is," he said. "Commander, I want to ask you, and please understand that I am asking for personal reasons, not diplomatic ones. Are you afraid right now?" I looked out the viewport at the engagement, at the shapes on the readout, at the mass of the Maw, smaller than it had been 9 days ago, still enormous, still taking ships and lives, still requiring every fragment of attention and strategy I had. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "What does that feel like? Right now? In the middle of this?" I thought about it honestly. "Like a room with no walls," I said. "Everything is present at once, and there is no edge to any of it. The fear is there, and so is everything else. And I do what I came here to do, because that is what there is to do." "And the people you've lost," he said. "What does that feel like?" The ship names were in my log, every one of them. "Like I'm carrying something," I said. "I'll carry it until this is done, and then I'll put it down somewhere I can look at it properly." "Not yet." Travail was quiet for a long time. "There is no word in my language," he said finally, "for what you are describing." Day 11 began with the mass readings showing the Maw at 31% of its arrival mass. Adler's modeling said that somewhere between 15 and 20%, the mass would drop below the threshold for self-sustaining operation. The Maw would not cease to exist at that point, but it would cease to be capable of the kind of behavior that made it dangerous. It would become an object, a large, strange, post-biological object drifting in space. An object was something we could manage. The 11th day was the hardest because we were close, and the Maw was responding with a kind of concentrated intensity that it had not shown in the earlier stages. Whether that was adaptation or something more instinctual, something an old predator does when it is losing, I do not know. What I know is that it cost us 3 more ships in a 6-hour window on the morning of day 11, and those were the losses that I felt most acutely, because they came when the end was visible, and the distance between where we were and where we needed to be seemed almost unbearably short. The final hours of the engagement I remember in a particular clarity that I have noticed before in extreme situations, where time becomes both very slow and very fast simultaneously, and the field of your perception narrows to exactly what is in front of you. I remember Crane's voice calling mass readings every 20 minutes. I remember Hollis running calculations at her station, with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back in the practical way she always had it, when she was deep in complex work. I remember Adler adjusting firing coordinates with the focused ease of someone who had done this so many times in simulation that the real thing had become an extension of the same motion. At 14:23 on day 11, the Maw's mass reading crossed the threshold. The behavior change was immediate. The concentrated intensity collapsed. The remaining mass began to disperse in the way Adler's model had predicted, spreading outward slowly, losing cohesion. It did not happen all at once. It took another 7 hours for the dispersal to reach the point where the engagement could formally be declared concluded. I did not celebrate at 14:23. I did not celebrate at any point during those 7 hours. I kept my crew at their stations, kept the weapons ready, kept monitoring, because the gap between almost done and done is where the worst things can still happen, and I had not come this far to lose something to inattention. At 22:01 on the 11th day, Crane looked up from his sensors and said, "Commander, the Maw is no longer registering as a coherent entity. Mass dispersal is complete." I looked at his screen. I looked at the reading. I looked at what it said. "All ships, stand down from combat stations," I said. "Maintain formation and hold position. Report all status." The reports came in over the next 20 minutes. What remained of my fleet? 76 ships, of the 93 that had begun. 914 names in my log, the number that I had been carrying for 11 days, and that I now set down in my mind, the way you set down something heavy, carefully, with full attention to what it is. Travail's ship moved closer. His face appeared on my screen. He looked as if he had not slept in 11 days either, and perhaps he had not. He looked at me for a long moment. "Commander Voss," he said. "Ambassador," I said. He could not seem to find words for a moment. "Is it done?" he asked. "It is done," I said. He exhaled. It was a long, shaking exhale, the kind that belongs to the end of something very large. 914, I said. I said it quietly, not for any particular reason, just because those were the words that were in the front of my mind. "Yes," he said. He understood. I looked at the dispersal reading one more time, at the data that showed, in the precise language of electromagnetic measurement, that the thing which had ended 3 civilizations across 2 billion years was now an object rather than a presence. Then I said to Crane, "Log the time. Engagement concluded 22:01. Logged," he said. His voice was completely steady, and I was proud of him for it. I sat back in my chair. "Get me a communications line to Earth," I said. "I have a report to file." Between day 7 and day 8, there was a period of 6 hours when the engagement had stabilized into something approaching a rhythm, not a comfortable rhythm, a brutal, grinding rhythm, the kind of rhythm that a long endurance run produces, where the effort is constant and the end is not yet visible, but the body and the mind have accepted the terms and settled in. I used 4 of those 6 hours to do something I would not normally do in the middle of an operation. I walked the ship, not all of it. We are not small, but I walked the main corridors, the engineering sections, the gun decks, the medical bay. I stopped wherever crew members were not actively required to be elsewhere, and I spoke to them, not about the engagement, not about strategy or status or next steps, about whatever they wanted to talk about home, in some cases, about food, in the particular way that people who have been eating operational rations for 7 days think about real food, about what they were going to do when this was done, when the ship was back in a standard berth, and there was shore leave, and the world was something other than this. I did this because I have learned over 12 years of command that there are things you can only do for your crew in person, and one of those things is being present with them in a way that acknowledges that they are full human beings inside the uniform, not just the function the uniform represents. They work better for it, not because it is a technique, but because it is true, and people respond to things that are true. In the medical bay, Neil Foss was managing the injuries from the engagement so far. Most were minor. 3 were serious but stable. He moved between patients with the same focused calm he brought to everything, and when I stopped to speak to the crew members who were not actively in treatment, he stood nearby in the way he had of being present without being intrusive. One of the crew members in the bay was a young engineer named Carter, 19 years old, who had caught a flying fragment of console housing during a close-range strike on day 5. The wound had been cleaned and dressed, and he was mobile, but Foss was keeping him in the bay for observation. He was sitting up on his cot when I found him, reading something on a tablet, and he looked up when I came in with the expression of a person who is not entirely sure whether the presence of their commanding officer in the medical bay is a good sign or a complicated one. "Carter," I said, "how are you feeling?" "Better, Commander," he said, "ready to go back to station." "Foss will tell you when you're ready to go back to station," I said. "How are you actually feeling?" He paused. He was thinking about whether to give me the expected answer a second time, or the real answer. He decided on the real answer. "Nervous," he said. "Not scared. I mean, I was scared on day 5. Now I'm just nervous. Like before an exam, kind of." "That's the right kind of nervous," I said. "That means your body is paying attention to what's happening, and keeping you alert. Scared is when it gets in the way of what you need to do. Nervous just means you understand the situation." He thought about that. "Is there a difference? For you right now?" "I'd say so," I said. "You're still thinking clearly. You're still tracking the situation. You're right here having this conversation and asking good questions. Scared tends to look different." He nodded slowly. "What does scared look like, Commander? For you?" It was a genuine question, not a challenge, not an attempt to destabilize me. Just a 19-year-old who had been in the medical bay for 2 days thinking about things. "Like a room with no walls," I said. "Everything at once and no edges. It passes if you give it a moment and focus on what's in front of you." He nodded again. "Okay," he said. "Thanks." "You're welcome," I said. "Rest while Foss tells you to rest." I left the bay and went back to the bridge, and I thought about Carter for a moment. about his specific kind of bravery, which was the quiet, ordinary kind that does not look like bravery from the outside, but is the thing that holds everything else up. 19 years old, 2 days in the medical bay, and his first concern when I asked how he was doing was whether he was ready to go back to his station. Every ship in my fleet had people like Carter. That was the actual nature of the thing we were doing, not the strategy or the formation or the weapons analysis. It was people like Carter, holding their position, doing their job, paying attention to the situation, and keeping their focus on what was in front of them. On day 10, with the engagement grinding toward its conclusion, I gave the crew of the Relentless 6 hours of rest rotation, split into thirds, so the ship was never below full operational capacity. I slept for 2 of those hours myself, in my bunk with the comm still active so any change in status would reach me immediately, and when I woke I lay there for a few minutes in the dark and thought about the names I was carrying and about what would come after this, and then I got up and went back to the bridge. That was day 10. Day 11 arrived and it was time. 3 months after the engagement ended, I walked back into the Conclave's assembly chamber. This time, I was not alone. Behind me were 5 officers from the United Earth Federation Navy, all of them people who had been aboard ships in the engagement, all of them still carrying, as I was, the particular quiet that settles over a person who has been through something very large and has not yet fully decided what to do with it. We had arrived in a Federation shuttle, which we had docked at the Conclave station under our own authority, with our own clearances, because those clearances now existed, having been issued by the Council 3 weeks after the engagement without a full vote, by what the Conclave's procedural records described as unanimous assent. Tavale met us at the docking bay. He was dressed in formal Aethori diplomatic attire, which was more elaborate than anything I had seen him wear before, and he greeted me with the formal bilateral greeting of the Aethori, both pairs of hands extended, which I had learned to reciprocate correctly. He looked rested, which was more than I had looked in months. He also looked like a person who was carrying something very specific in his expression, a careful, composed quality that I recognized as the face a person wears when they have been thinking about something for a long time and have finally decided what they think. "Yara," he said. "Tavale," I said. We walked together. He had been in extensive communication with Earth's Council in the weeks since the engagement, and I knew the broad outlines of what had been arranged. But there is a difference between knowing outlines and being in the room where the specific details become real. The assembly chamber was different this time. The lighting was slightly warmer. The arrangement of the delegations had shifted in a way that I noticed before I could articulate why, and then I understood. The first time I had been here, I had stood at the center of the floor as the subject of the session. Today, there was a table at the center, a long, formal table, and there were seats on both sides of it, and my delegation and the Conclave's primary representatives were expected to sit across from each other rather than in the arrangement of examined and examiner. That was not a small thing. The Veth presiding officer was already seated when we arrived. She was, I had learned, the same individual who had held the presiding chair for the last 400 years, which gave me a sense of scale about the Veth that nothing in my briefing notes had quite conveyed. She watched me cross the floor with the steady, undecipherable expression that I had not yet learned to read with any confidence, and when I reached the table she stood briefly, which Tavale had told me was a significant gesture for the Veth, who almost never stood for anything. "Commander Voss," she said, "we are grateful you came." "I appreciate the invitation," I said. We sat. The first hour was devoted to the formal statement of what was being proposed. The Conclave's legal representatives presented it in the exhaustive, layered language that an 11,000-year-old institution uses for its most significant agreements. I had a copy of the text and I followed along, with my legal officer Lieutenant Petra Wade beside me making notes. The core of it was a mutual arrangement. The Conclave would open its scientific and technological databases to the United Earth Federation, with no restrictions on access, except for certain specific areas that required separate negotiation. The Conclave's star maps, covering the surveyed regions of this galactic arm, would be made available to us on a shared basis. The Conclave's trade networks, which connected 42 civilizations across several thousand light-years, would be accessible to Earth as a full trading partner. In return, the United Earth Federation would agree to serve as the Conclave's primary defense provider for this sector of space. not for the entire conclave. The full conclave spanned a region too large for any one member to cover, but for this sector, for the worlds and installations and populations that had evacuated before the Maw's arrival and were now beginning to return, for the region that had just seen something happen that had not happened in 11,000 years of conclave history, the Federation would maintain a standing defensive commitment. It was, as I had told Travail in what seemed now like another lifetime, a good arrangement. Travail spoke at length during the session. He had prepared remarks, which he delivered with the formal precision of his diplomatic role, and then set aside and spoke for several additional minutes, in a way that was clearly personal rather than official. He talked about the engagement. He talked about watching 93 ships enter a fight that the Conclave's oldest institutional memory said could not be won. He talked about Day 9, when he had called me, and what I had said to him about carrying something until the work was done. He did not try to characterize us. He did not attempt to fit us into any category the Conclave had used before. He simply described what he had observed, with the care of someone who understands that accurate description of an unprecedented thing is the most important thing you can offer to people who were not there. There were questions. There were always questions. A delegate from the Shen, the same species that had pushed back in the first session, asked about the Federation's defense commitment. Specifically, they asked what humans would consider a provocation requiring a military response, and whether the Conclave's member species would have any input into that determination. I answered this myself. The threshold, I said, is a serious threat to the lives or sovereignty of the people we have committed to protect. We do not act on suspicion or on political disagreement. We act when something is actually hurting or imminently about to hurt the people we are responsible for. That determination will be made by the Federation's command structure, but we will be in continuous communication with the Conclave Council, and in any situation that allows for it, we will consult before acting. In any situation that allows for it, the Shen delegate repeated. Yes, I said. If something appears in our defensive zone with the characteristics of a serious imminent threat, we will engage and tell you simultaneously. There is not always time for a council session. The Shen delegate was quiet for a moment. You are describing a significant level of independent authority. I am describing, I said, exactly how defensive military operations work in a real environment. The alternative is not a council session. The alternative is the thing getting past us while we are still scheduling the vote. The Shen delegate sat back. The presiding Veth officer made a small sound that her translator did not render, which I interpreted as the sound someone makes when a point has been made cleanly and they are privately acknowledging it. A delegate I had not seen at the first session spoke, small and pale, a species called the Idran, who Travail had told me were among the most mathematically sophisticated beings in the conclave, and had been calculating something since the beginning of the session. Commander Voss, the Idran said, our analysis of the engagement with the Maw has produced a figure that I wish to share with this body. Please, I said. Based on the Maw's historical behavior and the rate of progress your fleet achieved, we calculate that the engagement reduced the Maw to an incoherent dispersed state approximately 400 years before it would have reached any world currently inhabited by conclave member species. They paused. 400 years of inhabited worlds, at current population densities, represents approximately 60 billion lives. The chamber was very quiet. That is a rough calculation with significant uncertainty, the Idran added. But even accounting for maximum uncertainty in either direction, the figure does not fall below 40 billion. I said nothing. The number was real, but it was not the kind of number I could hold directly. It was too large. What I could hold were the 914 names in my log. The rest, the tens of billions that the math described, existed somewhere else, in a space too large for direct feeling. The Urathi delegate, the small round-bodied being who had asked me what I wanted from the conclave in my first session, spoke again. I asked you then what you wanted from us, she said. You said a good arrangement. You were right. This is a good arrangement. But I want to ask you something different today. Go ahead, I said. What do you want for yourselves? She said, not from us. For your own civilization. What are you trying to build? I thought about that. It was a genuine question, and the person asking it was genuinely curious, in the way she had been genuinely curious the first time we spoke. The same thing we have always been trying to build, I said. A civilization worth defending. We have been building that for our entire history. Every generation added something, fixed something, lost something, and rebuilt. We have not finished. We will not finish in any foreseeable time. But the project is to make humanity, on the whole, something that was worth the cost of getting here. And is it? She said. In your view? I thought about the 914. I thought about the 4,000 years in the archive. I thought about dogs and houses, and children playing games about heroes, and an endurance hunter running something across a dry plain an unimaginably long time ago. Not fast, just persistent, just refusing to stop. We're working on it, I said, but I think we're heading in the right direction. She smiled. Urathi's smiling looks different from human smiling, but the quality of it was the same. After the formal session, the signing ceremony was set in a smaller room off the main chamber, which I was glad of. The large chamber was impressive and appropriate for the session, but a ceremony of this kind felt better in a space where you could see the faces of the people across from you. The treaty was a physical document, as well as a digital one. The conclave maintained the tradition of physical documents for their most significant agreements, and I was told that the physical copy would be stored in the Veth's primary archive, which had maintained unbroken records for 12,000 years. Wade set our copy in front of me. The presiding Veth officer set the conclave's copy in front of herself. Tavail sat between us, not as a principal but as witness, which was the role he had asked to be given. I looked at the document. I thought about Admiral Hargrove, who was watching the signing via relay and would have something pithy to say about it afterward. I thought about Crane and Hollis and Adler and Foss and the whole crew of the Relentless and the crews of the other 75 surviving ships and the 914 names. I thought about Tavail's face when he had asked me if I was afraid on day 9 and what it had looked like when I told him yes. I thought about what humans were, not what we were supposed to be or what we might become, or what the conclave's categories had room for. What we actually were: hunters, survivors, people who had run things to death across dry plains and had brought predators into their homes and had loved them. People who had fought 14,000 wars and filled them all with history so that no one would have to learn the same lesson, the same hard way. People who had arrived in this galaxy, in this enormous old complicated galaxy, and had found that we were not the biggest or the oldest, or the most peaceful, or the most technologically advanced, but that we were precisely, specifically, exactly what the moment had required. The Veth officer uncapped her writing instrument. She looked at me. "Whenever you are ready, Commander," she said. I uncapped mine. I signed. The scratch of the instrument on the formal paper was quiet in the room, and when I was done I set it down and looked at Tavail. He was watching me with an expression that I knew now very well, had learned over the months of our acquaintance to read with increasing accuracy. It was the expression he wore when he was observing something he planned to carry with him for the rest of his life. "Well," I said. He gave me a small nod. "Well," he agreed. After the ceremony, I stood with my officers at the viewport of the station's observation deck, looking out at the stars. The conclave's regional hub was coming back to life around us. Ships returning, installations reopening, the ordinary business of civilization resuming. The evacuation had been a disruption, and it would take time to fully recover, but it was already recovering, and that recovery would be faster and more complete than any previous one, because this time, the thing that had driven the evacuation was not going to move on. It was done. Petra Wade stood beside me. She had been with me through every part of this, from the first signal on the bridge of the Relentless to the signature on the treaty document, and she had maintained throughout the same steady, watchful competence that I had always relied on from her. "What happens now?" she asked. "We go home," I said. "We honor our people. We file our reports. We begin the actual work of the arrangement we just signed, which is going to be complicated and fascinating, and is going to require a great deal of patience and creativity from everyone involved. And after that?" I looked at the stars. "We keep going," I said. "That's what we do." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think they understand us now? The conclave?" "They understand us better than they did," I said. "They'll keep learning. So will we." "Is that enough?" she said. I thought about it honestly. "It's what there is," I said. "And it's a start." I took one last look at the stars. 42 civilizations out there, and the star maps that the Conclave was going to share with us, and the knowledge databases, and the trade networks, and the still unresolved enormous complicated galaxy that was now, by formal signed agreement, something we were a part of and partly responsible for. I thought about what I had written in my personal log on the night of the signing. I had opened it after the ceremony and written a single paragraph, the kind of thing you write when you want to remember not the facts but the feeling of a moment. It read, "We came in peace, with weapons at our sides, because peace and weapons are not opposites for us. They are the same project from different angles. We stayed in formation when everything else ran. We carried our losses the whole way, and we did not put them down until the work was finished. The galaxy asked us to be what we already were, and we signed a paper that said yes. That is the whole story. Everything else is detail." I closed the log and turned away from the viewport. "Let's go home," I said. We walked back through the station, through the corridors of the oldest continuous civilization in the region of space we now shared. 5 officers from the United Earth Federation in their formal service uniforms, and every being we passed in those corridors watched us go, with expressions that I was getting better at reading, and that all meant, in their different ways, some version of the same thing. They knew who we were now. Not the story they had expected to find when they found us. Not the child civilization that needed welcoming. Not the brief alarm of the Rixari engagement, and not the shock of the council testimony. All of those were parts of it, but none of them was the whole. The whole was simpler and more fundamental than any of those pieces. The whole was that we had come out of the dark with everything we were. All of the complicated, difficult, dangerous, creative, grieving, persistent everything of us. And we had meant it honestly. Every part of it. And the galaxy was going to have to do what everyone does when they meet something real. Learn to live with it. We stepped into our shuttle, and the door closed behind us. The engines, which were our engines, and worked the way our engineers had built them, and sounded exactly the way they always had, came to life with a low, steady hum. Petra Wade began running the departure checklist in the efficient, professional way she always ran checklists, and the station fell away behind us, and the stars filled the viewport, and we went home.